Okay, welcome to the merits of multiplayer. I know it's really early, and like my predecessor mentioned, a lot of people are going to be slightly hungover. So I'd like to start with an executive summary. So if you pass out halfway through my talk, you still get the gist. Multiplayer is awesome. What is multiplayer? There are many different definitions of multiplayer, and I'm going to be the one speaking. So in this instance, my definition is really the only one that counts. To give you a frame of reference for what follows, knowing what that definition is probably going to help you. So in this case, a multiplayer game is any game where your interaction with other players is a core part of the gameplay. You could be playing with or against each other, but as long as that fact has an impact on my experience, we're talking multiplayer. What I definitely do not consider multiplayer in the frame of this talk is any game where I have to visit your farm to water your sheep or shave your dog for an in-game reward. Then, what makes me the expert? Let me be the first one to admit that I'm not necessarily an expert. I do have quite a lot of experience in the field. I've been an avid gamer for years, but mostly I've been deeply involved with GamePoint for the last 6 years, and we at GamePoint, above all, do multiplayer. We've been doing multiplayer for 15 years, synchronous multiplayer. And in that time, we've grown from a single card game to a very vibrant community of people that play 24 interconnected games. And in that time, there have been many GamePoint babies, marriages, relationships, and some divorces. The merits of multiplayer. Multiplayer is big. Multiplayer is World of Warcraft, it's Call of Duty, it's League of Legends, but in our side of the business, the casual social space, it's also pretty big. It's Zynga Poker, it's 8-ball pool multiplayer, it's Clash of Clans. Actually, even though it definitely has its merits, it is somewhat underrepresented. It's underrepresented in a lot of the spaces out there. If you check the iOS App Store number of free downloads, 1 out of 10 games right now in the top 10 is actually multiplayer. In Facebook, it's 2 out of 10. And what's kind of interesting is that if you go to the top grossing games on iOS, suddenly half is multiplayer. And I don't think that is a coincidence. Apparently there's some money there. So why isn't everybody doing multiplayer? I'm gonna try and run through a quick list of pros and cons. If you've done multiplayer, or have any experience in the space, not necessarily gonna be very interesting. But as we saw before, like 9 out of 10 of you aren't doing multiplayer. We only have like a 20-minute slot today, so I'm going to try to keep the pace relatively high, so we have some time for questions at the end. So let's just get started with the pros and cons. One of the pros is definitely great retention. One of the things multiplayer does above all is allow people to form connections. However great your game is, the retention you see when people start connecting and building relationships within a game is really something else. When you log into a game day after day and develop an interest in the lives of the people you're playing with, that game, it becomes an extension of your real-world social life. You check in on your friends, give them a call, send them an email, maybe poke them on Facebook every once in a while. And players do the exact same thing within a game, but because your game was the platform where they met each other, your game is going to be the place they connect. That interest in the people they've met in your game is going to be retained for quite a lot longer than your game is probably going to be interesting. You know, our games are awesome, but we've had games that haven't changed in 10 years and still have thousands upon thousands of people playing them at the same time. That's not because the game is amazing and the best game ever built. It's because of the people and the connections they formed in these games. Actually, this graph is a pretty good example of what multiplayer retention will usually look like. Because of some issues I will get to in the cons section, multiplayer has problems with day one retention, but after day one retention, numbers go crazy. Actually, in our own games, if you cut out day one drop-off, retention is well over 24 months, which is an insane amount of time. And one of the stories that actually illustrates this quite well has to do with the way we get our traffic in the Netherlands. Traditionally, we've had very many traffic partners where we integrate our games on their website and we share revenue. When I started it at GamePoint, we had 2 years before ended a partnership with Spill Games. I don't know if people know Spill Games. Spill Games have a lot of casual gaming portals worldwide. Our games were on their website roughly 10 years ago. Back then, we honestly weren't making much money. We didn't have virtual currency. We only monetized through subscriptions. So Spill Games, they sent us a lot of traffic, and it wasn't monetizing. So they pulled the plug, which makes sense. When I started at GamePoint, I was there for like a couple of months, and one of the first things I did was check what happened to all these Spill users. And we're talking 3 years after they pulled the plug here. And it turned out these people were still active, and not only were they still active, in the meantime we learned to monetize, and they were spending thousands a month. So what I did was, I picked up the phone and called Spill and told them, you know, it's unfortunate that you pulled the plug because we have tens of thousands of euros here that could have been yours. They invited me over. A week later I was there, had a great talk with their head of business development, ironed out a new deal. Just as I was about to happily call our CEO, she pulled out the original contract, which stipulated a lifetime revenue share. So suddenly my call about a new deal turned into a call about costing the company tens of thousands of euros. I was a bit nervous to make that call. Funnily enough, I did not get fired and I did not get yelled at. Actually, it took us 3.5 months into the new deal to make all that money back. And we're still working together now 5 years later, making quite a lot of money together. And that's, again, because retention is great. And when people are spending a lot of time in your game and have a long-lasting relationship with your game, they're going to be willing to spend money. So that's interesting. Another pro. Multiplayer has built-in discoverability. Multiplayer is just that. It's played by multiple people together. If you enjoy a multiplayer game, it's natural to try and get your friends involved. The tried and tested social game mechanic of inviting your friends has its uses, but an unincentivized invite of somebody that actually enjoys your game and wants to share it with somebody and share that experience is much, much more valuable. I think there's no greater example of this than the asynchronous multiplayer genre that has exploded on mobile. Discoverability is, and will probably keep on being an issue on mobile. And even though we all love the App Store, if you're not in a top 10 list, that is an issue. And I think the massive attendance of the mobile ad networks over the last couple of days probably illustrate that fact quite well. By making inviting your friends a core part of your gameplay loop, discoverability is just built in from the start. So build a fun game where your user needs to send an invite to a friend, and suddenly organic growth on mobile is possible. Another pro, your users are your content. Like I said before, we have games that pretty much haven't changed over the last decade. And for players, these games tend to still be fresh. And that's because the players are actually the content. Every new player is a new challenge and a new experience waiting to happen. Actually, if you compare it to something like King's highly addictive game around crushing candies, the most engaged players and the best monetizing players are actually the ones that blast through your content the fastest. And creating new content, keeping these players engaged, it just turns into this never-ending race. It's not a bad race. I mean, they're obviously making some money. But it's an expensive race. It takes a lot of people, it takes a lot of resources. Now compare that to a game like Zynga Poker or one of our own games, War Tornado, which keep people engaged for years and just haven't changed. And that's because we have new content flowing in constantly. It's just not game content in the traditional sense. It's the other players. So we have great retention, built-in discoverability, and free content every time a player joins your game. So why isn't everybody doing multiplayer? In multiplayer, your players are your content. And we've come a long way in the industry. We've gone very data-driven, look at data, tweak, tweak, tweak. But then there's multiplayer. And you could have just spent a year perfecting the experience step by step. And with a simple root player, that entire experience is just gone. In multiplayer, in essence, one player's action can affect all players' satisfaction. In our day-to-day experience as an operator of what is in essence like a massive virtual world populated by otherwise intelligent and well-behaved adults, we've run into the full spectrum of negative human behavior. We've seen some crazy things. And I think one of the best examples of this unwanted behavior and the effect it has on your gameplay is the aversion that multiplayer gamers have towards noobs. And it sounds like a core gaming principle and something a 15-year-old says. We have 40-year-old women playing these games, and they behave in the exact same way. If you're a veteran player and a new player joins your game, chances are you'll just kick them out. And that's a player you've spent money on. That's a player for which you've crafted this whole experience, and it's just ruined by the fact that another player doesn't behave in the way you would want them to behave. Another issue, gaining critical mass is hard. Less of an issue in asynchronous games, but in synchronous multiplayer, you need critical mass for your game to work. If playing with or against someone else is a core part of your gameplay, and a new player has nobody to play with, they'll be gone. And that's not in an hour, that's not in a minute, it's actually just seconds, because they see nobody and they leave. So when launching a new game or entering a new market, getting those first players in there and getting them to stick is extremely difficult. One trick is simply putting your own people in to play there. It's not terribly scalable. Another trick is simply having a very big bag of money and buying a burst of traffic, but that's really not an option for everyone. Another issue is that multiplayer isn't the norm, and it partly explains the drop-off you saw on the first day of that retention graph. It's mostly an issue on desktop, but when a user clicks on an ad, they expect a very casual experience, and we've taught these people to be cow clickers. Bite-sized gaming is the norm, but to get the best out of a multiplayer experience, you need to invest time. A good example, again, would be a game of Word Tornado. The average game of Word Tornado is actually a little over 20 minutes, but the average time a user spends on a Facebook game per session is 7 minutes. There's like a big discrepancy there. And your job, in this case, as a multiplayer developer, is to seduce that player into investing extra time. And it doesn't always work, and it's definitely never easy. So finally, to recap, when multiplayer works, it's a beautiful thing. Your long-term retention is great. Organic growth is a multitude of what it is for a single-player game. And every new user extends your game's lifetime by becoming content for the other players. To make it work, there are some hurdles to take. You need to educate your user on what multiplayer is. You will have to invest a lot in getting that critical mass going. And even then, a misbehaving user can ruin that carefully crafted experience for every other player. And at the end of the day, multiplayer isn't perfect. It's definitely not for everyone. If you want to try it, think about how to exploit its many strengths while minimizing the effect of its inherent weaknesses. 5 out of 10 top grossing iPhone apps recommended. Thanks. Any questions?
Do you do mostly Facebook?
Hello. Ready?
Yeah.
Dmitry here from Rocket Alien. I have a question about PvP one-on-one with matchmaking. Do you have any stats, one-on-one gameplay with matchmaking without, the multiplayer aspect that you talked about, the synchronous multiplayer where you have a lot of people playing at the same time, but just one-on-one PvP experience? And stats in terms of, how many games in top 3 or top grossing are like that?
I do not.
Hey, nice talk, thank you.
Thanks.
Do you have any, I'm not sure if you guys do it, but any insights on cross-platform and the importance in multiplayer?
It's become the norm. It's what players expect. To be honest, we're struggling to make it work because we do synchronous multiplayer, and synchronous is just hard to get working on some of the devices out there. Mobile phone isn't the best platform to do synchronous multiplayer. But you have to be there. A user just expects to play a game on a desktop and be able to continue the same game on a tablet and continue the same game on a phone. We got it working pretty well on a tablet right now, where you can start a game on Facebook, get out the tablet, log into the tablet, and continue the exact same game with the exact same people, having the same conversation. And you see that these cross-platform players, they spend a significant amount of extra time and a significant amount of extra revenue.
Hi. In regards to the problem of getting that critical mass in the beginning, have you ever played around with doing some maybe AI faked players that were taking turns in the asynchronous games?
We're not AI builders. And it's honestly not as easy as it sounds, and it doesn't give the user the experience we want to give them. Yeah, our strength, and it's probably gonna be different for different companies. Our strength is the social aspect. Our strength is the fact that you can talk to each other and interact. If that's not there, then it might as well be a single player game. It kind of has to be a real person for it to work. Okay, thanks. Oh.
You showed, I think I might have missed it, but you showed a slide of Words with Friends, but do you have any other sort of list of examples of your favorite success stories in multiplayer on mobile?
I think that the best example in the game everybody's probably played is Draw Something. Draw Something just exploded, and exploded because it was multiplayer, and because it involved a mechanic where you were sharing something that was inherently interesting to your friends. And I think that was what made them grow as fast as they did. It's unfortunate that their retention hasn't been great, but I think one of the problems there is that the actual interaction was very, very limited. So at the end of the day, it was still just the gameplay, and the game just got boring. Okay.
Rik, thanks so much. That was a great talk, everyone. Give it up for Rik.